Hey guys, I hope you guys are having a good day today. I don't know what I want to talk about today, but I'll probably ramble a bit and we'll see where that goes. Um, but I've noticed my inattention when I'm playing recently, and I'm noticing the large fear of seeing my own ignorance when I start to go deeper in hands and when I start to really deeply pay attention and I get to a flop, and rather than saying I have this hand and this is what I'm going to do and this is my strategy and click and I think he's doing that, I have started to try to think deeply about what my opponent has. And then there's also an extra layer simultaneously of what I think he's going to do with what he has and what I think he will arrive with and what he'll do with all these other hands and other nodes of the game tree. This is pretty scary stuff. It's actually absolutely terrifying. It's far more terrifying than war. It's far more terrifying than a woman rejecting me. It's far more terrifying than getting into a physical fight. Because those things don't really go against my self-image. Those things don't really make me feel my own ignorance. But really trying to think about hands deeply, there are so many possibilities and I can never have a clue as to what my opponent is doing, and all I can do is imagine that I'm winning based on the strategy that I'm playing, but actually I don't know what strategy my opponent's playing, and I can only make this information. Again, say there are on average 5 rigs at a table, 4.5 rigs at a table, and say on average we're all winning like 3 BB 100, and say some are winning a bit more, some are winning a bit less, say like 6, whatever, depends on the rake, depends on the opposition. Say we're winning more. Say we're not playing Zoom, we're playing a regular table, and the recreational player is losing a bit more. And maybe even we're making a little bit of rake back as well. So say we're at 6 BB, or whatever the case is. The recreational player is losing, say, 50 BB 100 pre-rake, or 40 or something. It's very fundamental to be able to question every single assumption that we have without assuming that our assumption is a fact. Elon Musk, in a number of interviews, has spoken about thinking about things from first principle. Albert Einstein, who was very intelligent, the area that he did particularly well in was using his imagination to make thought experiments. He was not a fan of memorizing arbitrary things, but he was very good at running thought experiments and considering the outcomes of multiple possibilities. He ran a thought experiment on relativity for 10 years at his desk as a clerk. He could have been in the university. He could have started to memorize and play games, these political games, but he was more interested in his own thoughts about life, about whatever came up. It's not like thoughts about me. What the fuck does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. Self-referential thought doesn't have any meaning, right? So we're playing a poker game, or we're thinking about relativity, or we're thinking about whatever idea we have. But I like poker more than anything, so I'll discuss poker. It's very important to understand the framework in which we're making decisions. It's very important to look at the framework in which decisions come out. Not, I believe this is the case. Well, why do I believe this is the case? It's not an objective fact. Our knowledge is only a function of what's gone into our brain previously. There's no objective reality that we just magically have, right? So we get born and we don't have this mental model of the world. In reality, if we look at a mirror, we don't even know that it's us because we have this undifferentiated awareness. We're not like looking at a mirror and then hallucinating on top of the mirror and saying, wow, this is me. We're just simply seeing reality. And then as we get older, we develop this thing called a sense of self. So other animals do not have a sense of self, a separate sense of self from existence in the way that the ego is developed. So rather than being able to look at information in a very cold and calculated way, in the way that we would look at a hand history of 2 players that we don't know anything about, and we say, well, I think most people probably do this, most people do that. The problem is that when we get in hand, it's very hard to think about the other person's perspective objectively without our presuppositions as to the meaning relative to what we currently have. And there's a very large underlying thought process that exists in my psyche which rewards me in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily say dopamine. I don't even know what dopamine means. See, I'm just taking a random word. I've never touched a dopamine before, and I've not done enough research on this to have much authority. But say I'm simply talking about the reward center of feeling good. And then I'm imagining words and trying to make myself sound a little bit official using some big words like dopamine. Receptors. I don't fucking know, right? I don't know how the brain communicates. And I don't have the capacity to know, because the knowledge that I would be given would be borrowed by someone else's words. And those words that I would get out of a textbook or someone's mouth, I would create an image of that. It's not like I would experience this dopamine directly. I could only imagine that reinforcing my previous beliefs is something that is one of the rewards that the nervous system essentially gives. It's sort of like a survival mechanism, like, I'm eating food, I'm getting rewarded. Oh, I'm sleeping, I'm getting rewarded. But the brain is so vast and so complex and has such a extraordinary capacity to compute. The capacity of the brain is absolutely astonishing, and I will be going into many examples about the way that the brain works and the astonishing facts of the way that the brain can function when it starts to understand reality through a sort of perception that sees things mutually arising instead of cause and effect. And cause and effect mostly is the perception of most human beings, because we live in a society that functions off of cause and effect. So we're driving a car and we get into an accident, and in reality, like, you cannot just say, like, the reason why I hit this car is because of this. Like, that doesn't have any meaning, because you're simply like taking one very isolated incident. Ooh, my friend is calling me. One moment. I'm so sorry. I need to answer this. So the tool that we use in poker to be able to convey ideas as human beings is language. Not to say that other animals don't communicate with different types of language. Certainly insects like bees and ants know how to communicate in quite sophisticated ways, actually. They're able to kind of talk about like where food is, and I'm not sure if they're able to communicate about predators, but certainly they're able to communicate about like which flowers are good, what area there's sugar, etc. But these are not like vocal languages. And there are a lot of different animals, including different types of apes. We are Homo sapiens, which are a type of monkey. We have more like vocal languages. So essentially the cognitive revolution for human beings happened probably about 50,000 years ago, somewhere between like 25 and 100,000 years ago. It's quite hard to say, but this is what's considered as the cognitive revolution. And there's an idea that essentially there were mutations in the genetics of Homo sapiens, and we were able to start to communicate in vastly more complex ways, to be able to communicate ideas more than just simply, this is a lion, watch out. In fact, there are a lot of different studies where they show how animals, which we didn't necessarily evolve from, but we could say apes actually, which we did evolve from chimpanzees, they're able to communicate about watch out, there's a lion, simply through different types of like squeaks. And they're able to communicate in incredibly complex ways. There have been scientists who have gone and played certain recordings of monkeys to a group of monkeys, and when playing the recording, the monkeys retreated into a tree. So the meaning of this sound was essentially be careful or something. Maybe like there's like a lion, I don't know what their word for lion is, or predator or danger. I'm not sure if they're able to differentiate the different types of danger. we don't really know that. But then there are also other types of calls that scientists have recorded where they are quite happy to frolic and play and be fun. So they have different ways of communicating. But the thing is that this language, when we go into poker, poker is not one-dimensional. And the language that we use is always self-created, even if we all agree that this is a tree. The perceiver's knowledge about the tree is his own knowledge. It's not objective knowledge. And if you only have a limited idea about trees, and I say the word tree, your mental model of the word tree will come up. Same if I say the word check raise. Same if I say the word six max no limit hold'em. Your idea of what that is, the meaning, will certainly be different than your opponent's. So repeating different phrases with language when we discuss poker is generally not a particularly effective method. I mean, even a parrot can basically repeat anything that Da Vinci said, Einstein said. It's even able to make, like siren sounds. Roo, roo, roo. Parrots are very intelligent. They're able to mimic very well. And human beings often have the assumption that because we all agree upon this language about poker, this is what we're doing, and other people use the same language, and this is the language that we use when we are playing hand histories. We are able to convince ourselves that because we use the same language as very strong players, that we also have this strong perception or this strong schema of how money moves across the table in poker, or how poker works. And this is kind of the thing that I want to dive into a bit. So one relatively important thing to consider is the fact that essentially Homo sapiens are social animals. And the primary thing that monkeys actually do in order to survive, or one of the key components to reproduce and stuff like that, is being able to communicate about different dangers, is being able to communicate about ideas in the future. And essentially, I would say that probably my experience is that I'm far more interested in, when I'm listening to poker, I'm far more interested in watching a poker video by Doug Polk about drama and gossip than I am in watching an actual poker theory video, or going and opening Pio Solver myself and really thinking about strategies and trying to understand the game deeper. My belief is that if I watch some sort of poker drama, this will actually make me better at poker, because I will listen to higher stakes poker players, or I don't really know if I view it for entertainment, but this is one of the mechanisms that's within me. And actually I would say that basically gossip is evolved kind of as a means of sharing information about the world, and it's very important to be able to convey this information. It's one of the ways that we actually get socialized when we're quite young, but I think it's very important to understand simply how vast and complex the brain is, because these different dramas that I'm interested in, it takes a significant amount of brain power to even watch the news and be able to create a context for what's being said, to be able to create knowledge. It's not like they're giving us knowledge, right? They're saying words, and then we are creating the meaning of everything that they are saying. The amount of information that someone has to actually obtain and store in order to track and think about the ever-changing, say, relationships of different poker players in the community having a drama with dozens of people. I don't want to say hundreds, but dozens of strong, famous people, and I know a lot of their names, and I know facts about them. It's unbelievable the amount of mental brain power that it actually takes to be able to consider all this information. For instance, if we have, say, 50 different high-stakes poker players throughout time, including the guys today, very strong players, and say 10 years ago, say I have 50 players that are my favorites or whatever, or that I've thought about. This combination, if you think about the amount of people that can be at a table, or if we're just talking about drama and not strategy, the amount of different dramas that could come up just with one-on-one type of feuds and different stuff. Is Tom Dwan better, or is Victor Blom better? But this always gets made. There are always different dramas. You get like thousands of combinations when you add multiple people at the same table. You get like millions of combinations of possible scenarios that end up coming up, and our brains are the ones that are processing the meaning of what we're watching. Someone gets angry and we're like, what does this anger mean relative to our model of the world? The complexity that the brain has, or the capacity to take in information socially and make decisions with this in our social world, is absolutely astonishing. And I want to say that this capacity is also possible in strategic decision making, but it requires a large, I don't want to say a paradigm shift. I would like to say like a shift in Gestalt. The word Gestalt, we could say, would mean, I don't know how I would describe it, but I would say sort of like our perception of what's important changes, our entire perception of what we're seeing, the meaning changes. I don't know if that's a great definition. I could probably Google it, but I'm a little bit lazy. But our entire focus from saying being interested in beating our opponent or memorizing GT or whatever, it has to change fundamentally into just pure strategy, not really much self-referential thought, not much confirming whether or not this is good compared to my old model. What do I think? How do I reaffirm my current ideas? In fact, often it's really quite detrimental to be doing this. Very often we need to just be in the moment and hand read and think very deeply about what is going on. But there are so many variables in poker, and all of the EV always comes out at the leaves. All the money, the payoffs are at the leaves. Leaves meaning that you get paid when you fucking get to the river and you show down, or someone bets and someone folds, and then the pot is won that way. So understand, when the pots get big, this is where the decisions really matter. If you think that your c-bet 1/3 makes much of a difference, it makes a difference, but it's mostly making a difference because you're leading your opponents into different parts of the game tree that they're unfamiliar with. We're not simply getting to a flop and saying, we're going to bet 1/3 with this hand. Absolutely not. We're getting to the flop, we're getting pre-flop and saying, how does this player play? What are his tendencies post-flop? Is he going to realize that we are RFIing too much and then realize that we're too wide and realize that we're barely, like, does he understand his tendencies? Well, no, he's probably not aware of what he's doing because he's focused on what we're doing. Well, what are we doing that's exploitable? What is he going to try to exploit in us? Is he aware that we're thinking about that? There's so much going on within a poker hand. I think that the tendency for poker players is often to, like, when studying, there's a sense of community. Now, certainly there are some people that are very intelligent that when they're studying, they're just going to training sites and they are watching videos and they're not interested in the different gossip. But if you look at most human communication, whether it's emails, phone calls, television, I mean, I don't know if people make newspapers anymore, but say newspaper columns, this sort of thing, the majority of it actually is just a gossip, and it comes to us very naturally, because our language is actually made for this sort of thing. Excuse me, I just got someone just sat at my table and I need to play them. I will be right back. So something that we'll end up seeing in poker is that often in study groups or even in videos, we'll see people talking about other people and their character and their morality and what they like about them, what they don't like about them, but this has absolutely nothing to do with poker strategy. This is essentially like the mechanism in the mind which increases its sense of self by talking about other people. And it's a good strategy actually within a society, at some level, to give information about this person is a cheater, this person fixed my car and he did a bad job and he said there was a bunch of shit wrong with it, and actually there was not a bunch of shit wrong with it, so he should not have said this. And now we let our neighbors know that we're not going to go there. So it's very useful, it's very utilitarian. But what often happens, even I'll give you an example of like very strong intellectuals, right? And say you have a bunch of professors that are of history in the department, they go eat lunch or something, and their coffee breaks, I don't think that they're talking about, say, like, why is it that Adolf Hitler was so silly, but he was able to infiltrate the most intelligent country in the world at that time and convince them of all of this nonsense, right? They're not talking about this kind of stuff. More often they're talking about like the other professor who is caught fucking his student in the bathroom, right? That's much more interesting. I would much rather talk about that than poker, than history. I don't know why. It's because it's interesting. But this mechanism within is it's very, very important to realize that this is not actually helpful for strategy, and actually it's a very large waste of energy and time. And when we are playing our opponents, we often create sort of mental characters of who we think they are, and we may view them as sort of someone who we don't like or we like, or that creates pain for us or not, or that we want to avoid, but this really has very little to do with strategy. Certainly we can say that, okay, well, we don't want to play with them or we don't like them, but we need to be very articulate about what it is within their game tree that we think they're doing wrong and how we can actually exploit it. This is like very important to go about specifics. You know, we cannot just go and say, well, you know, these people are fighting with the dean and with the department, and you know, I can't believe that this guy said that. We're just talking about rumors, and it's not poker. It's basically for recreational players or poker players who are not really, really deeply trying to improve, which I think is very important. And I think that there's a lion near the river or whatever, or there's a fucking, you know, group of predators that are going to get us, so we want to be able to transmit this information to another person. Very logical for a human being, but unfortunately when it comes to strategy, this kind of stuff we need to really think about avoiding, and thinking very deeply about the meaning of different strategic options and play, and etc., etc. Now, basically, to understand like our history, nature, psychology, which is the most important aspect. That's why I'm talking about this. I think it's important to take a look at our like hunter-gatherer ancestors and the entire history of our species over the last 3 million years, certainly the last 100,000 years. Unfortunately, over the last 200 years, most human beings have obtained their meals basically as like laborers, or workers or whatever, and then they go to the supermarket and they get it. But in the last 10, 15,000 years, maybe even up to 30, but really more like 10,000, the majority of people were basically just farmers or herders, you know, having cattle, animals, eating them. And then only in the last 100, 200 years, things have changed significantly. So I think that basically evolutionary psychology at least makes the argument that basically our social and our psychological characteristics of today are very, very much shaped by these hunter-gatherer days that we had, even before we started farming, for the last 3 million years. And I think it's a very interesting idea, the fact that human beings actually, even, I mean, I don't know about many countries, I don't think North Korea, but for example, where I'm from in America, a lot of people are gorging on like very poor food for their body, that's not really doing good for them, actually very sugary, terrible shit, and they're eating like 6 Ben & Jerry's ice creams at night, and they're eating a big Coke, and of course this is not the case, but if you look at the statistics, of obesity, it will say a lot. And it's not like for a random reason. Because like if someone, say 50,000 years ago, some beautiful woman with beautiful breasts who wasn't wearing a bra, was walking out and scavenging in the forest, maybe even she was bare butt naked, that would be lovely, right? And she found a tree of apples or a tree of very sugary fruit. She doesn't have Snickers bars, keep in mind. The most intelligent thing would be to eat them all right now, because we don't know that they're going to be here later. So this is hardwired into our DNA. And evolutionary psychology mostly speaks about this idea in regards to aspects of our life like our bodies, but I want to talk about how this influences our desire to acquire knowledge. Now, we could say that this is much more philosophical and it has to do with our individualistic? I can't even talk. That was funny. Our individualistic... I still can't say it. Someone will have to help me. But this kind of society that puts a lot of weight into the idea that we need to be very successful. We need to be very good. We are the one that is, if we are not doing very well, we are the reason why we are bad. Actually, probably about 500 years ago, culturally, it didn't really matter. If we were born into a place, it's not like we were going to get out. This is just the way it is. So there was not such a moral responsibility, feeling like we are bad people if we don't study. We are bad people if we're not getting better at poker, etc., or at life in general. Now, there's a lot more shame, and there's a lot more incentive to try to study at poker and get better. And this mostly comes from the pressure that our society gives us. And I would like to make the argument that this belief that we acquire more knowledge is simply coming from the idea that more knowledge will actually serve us when it comes to poker. And I would make the argument that actually, starting from first principle, thinking about the game very deeply from the perspective of what are we actually trying to accomplish first. This is very important. This is absolutely fundamental to any sort of problem solving. Not simply going to training sites and saying, wow, like listening to our own mind. I'm on this board and this guy does this, I should do that. No, but really trying to understand the game and its vastness and its complexity. Not simply grabbing any problem that seems interesting and trying to solve that. But trying to create a framework in which to think about the game holistically. And we have to think about the game backwards whenever we think about the game. It is a four-street game if we're playing No Limit, and we're not talking about a toy game. The biggest payoffs are always in the river, so we need to be thinking at the absolute beginning of every single hand, how are our opponents playing in these nodes? But if we ourselves have to look at how we are playing, it might cause us very large amounts of grief to say, wow, we are always over-bluffing in this situation, or we are always under-bluffing, or we're always doing this or always doing that. A very important part of improving at poker is actually looking at our own strategies and trying to see what we can do about our own strategies to exploit our own strategies. Because the other strategy is not something that's real, it's just an idea in our mind about what they're doing, but there's no objective way to know what their strategy is. Again, Homo sapiens can access reality through 5 sense perceptions. So touching, tasting, feeling, I think touching and feeling are the same thing. So I'm going to miss one here. Smelling, hearing, something like that. There's something else, right? Seeing, I don't know. But you get the idea. We cannot like jump into our opponent's mind and know what they're doing. And very often this is the deluded mind, where we think, yeah, our opponent definitely doesn't know what we're doing. But how do we know that we know what our opponent is doing? How do we have so much confidence? So this is what in spirituality would be called the ego. In psychology, it would also maybe would be called the ego or cognitive bias or whatever. This part of ourselves that doesn't really want to see our own irrationality and our own illogical nature. So one thing to say about like human beings is basically like the way that humans come into this world relative to other animals. It's almost as if we come out like I don't know if wax can be shaped into a candle. I'm not sure of how that works, or like glass coming out of an oven. That can be spun, it can be stretched, it can be shaped to a kind of crazy degree of creativity or freedom or whatever, however you would call that. This is actually the way, this is like the human brain. This is the way that we're able to kind of convince someone to be a capitalist or a communist or a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim. Peace-loving, war-loving, wanting conflict, not wanting conflict, vegetarian, etc. Like all these different kind of identities. We often assume that like this really big brain, this large tool, which certainly has great superior learning abilities, and we have great complex social structures where we're able to understand the psychology of ourselves and people quite well. It seems self-evident that this is very beneficial at some level, certainly for something like poker, right? But the problem is that looking back at history, over the last, say, 2 million years that we were evolving, actually we were basically in a terror constantly of predators. So these kind of fight or flight responses within our nervous system that were giving us alarm bells were constantly hijacking us and giving us the meaning. And actually in terms of the way that we see reality, we don't see reality. And I would like to make the argument, this is a very interesting argument. So I'm going to take a little bit of time and pause this and think about this before I spit it out, and I'll try to think about putting it in a way that is better than the way I have it in my mind currently. So I'm having a little bit of trouble thinking of how to put what I want to put into words, but the point is that we are seeing our vision, what we know, our knowledge, our perception of poker is not necessarily what it actually is in reality. It simply is our perception. It's a shortcut for us to be able to say, yes, this is definitely the case, but in reality it's actually just kind of like a model that we've created. There is a very good book, I cannot quite remember the name, I think it's called A Case Against Reality, which I liked quite a bit. I would absolutely suggest it. And one of the main blocks, one of the main building blocks of this dude's argument is that evolutionary game theory essentially shows or models interactions between different, say, lives in an environment, in an ecosystem, and it basically proves that fitness beats truth. And this is very important, that our perceptions based on evolution do not actually incentivize us to know the truth. And I'll use the example, if I can remember it correctly, from the book that he gave. But essentially he told us to look at a population of two different types of bird, a predator and a non-predator. And the model will basically stipulate what percentage of the population is going to be predators and what percentage is going to be prey. And between those, say the predators get certain points for certain interactions. Say that a hawk or an eagle will end up getting points when it sees a pigeon or a seagull. But when two seagulls meet each other, they will both get points. When the seagull meets this eagle, he's going to die. He's going to lose points. So basically the weaker birds, they don't fight when they actually encounter these predators. So they lose points. But when they meet and they make peace with their friends, they get points. And when the predators meet each other, they will both lose points. And using this kind of model, basically the argument is that we can tally up how many points a hawk and a pigeon have. And we can see the overall interactions. And for instance, we can make some models to show that the doves actually end up better off than the hawks if the percentage of the population it exceeds a certain number. But the same model also shows that the hawks fare much better than the doves if the percentage of hawks is also lower than a certain number, because there would be more ability for the animals to be able to eat. The animals at the top of the food chain, while they don't have predators, they actually have a very difficult job in terms of actually being able to get food. And so basically these predator to prey ratios stabilize at certain proportions within the environment. And say we're talking about 20% predators and 80% prey. Evolutionary game theory basically can be used to model the different traits and strategies that fare well in terms of reproductive fitness. And reproductive fitness is the way that we're biologically wired to make decisions. And this machine that we are using is certainly not separate from our poker decision making. And it's very, very important to understand that what we necessarily think about is just a model, it's just a collection of thoughts. When we think our opponent is doing this, it is the derivative of our knowledge. It is not an objective fact. And this is what happens in poker. We need to start questioning our own knowledge. We need to spend time not necessarily with solvers, not necessarily in study groups, but we need to spend time simply sitting after a poker session for an hour or two and thinking about the hands that we played. In fact, if we have a printer, print them up. If we only have the hand history, then spend 2 hours with the hand history, an hour with the hand history, but no external sources other than your brain and your own thinking. This is absolutely fundamental to actually expanding one's mind, because we have to start to delve in and understand the instrument that we are actually using to make decisions. So, anyways, I'll tell a few jokes. Get a little bit lighthearted for a second. I'll try. One poker player said to another poker player at the table, You can't believe you called my bluff." And the absent-minded poker player said, "Bluff? I thought we were playing Old Maid." And another joke, "You raise with a 7 and a 2. And the guy said, "Well, 7 is the lucky number, right? Or is it 2? I don't know." A little bit silly jokes. But basically the point is that we have to think about our own absent-mindedness at the table. And this in and of itself will create some sort of attentiveness. There's a method called concentration meditation where we focus on one particular object and we concentrate on that. That's not necessarily the best method for enlightenment, self-realization, but in terms of actually being able to focus on poker and not having so many different things come up and then we just choose an answer right there, I think concentration meditation can be a fairly reasonable strategy when it comes to kind of expanding our mind. But say, what happens when we end up getting 3-bet 3 times in a row? Like, what actually is going on in our mind? Has our emotional system changed? Does some sort of memory arise from when this happened before and we assign a meaning based on a memory of how this happened in the past, of how that guy definitely had it, and a memory how he was bluffing, and now we want to make a decision that changes from our general perception of what's going on simply because we get 3-bet 3 times in a row? Have we considered, what is our opponent's perception of our perception? Have we considered the general ways that we normally react in this situation? Do we think our opponents understand how we react in these situations? It's not only this situation that we react. If we are somewhat of a non-believer and we are often stationy, it may give our opponents knowledge that this is our general tendency, and we may not be able to see it. We may simply think that everybody's bluffing us, and now our opponent has that information, and the fourth time he's definitely not going to be bluffing. Not us. Now, if we were very believer-ish, if we were like, yes, we make folds, we're proud of this, whatever. Obviously, it's very much based on the context, the situation, so I'm being very general. But actually, I'm not being so general because there often is a player and he will be weighted one way or another, where he's more stationary or he's more foldy. And you can make the argument, yes, it depends on the street, depends on the texture, depends on his perception of how he values hands. Absolutely, but it's a very general thing, which of course nothing general is ever true, including this. But it does actually help us a little bit. And this is kind of important when we start to think about strategy. We need to start to understand how we are perceived. But the mind cannot see itself. The eye cannot see itself. And we cannot simply see the appearance of something and assume that it is the case. We should be like Lao Tzu. And Lao Tzu taught the water course way, basically. And in poker, we have to be like water. Lao Tzu once said something like, we should be like water. Flowing, fluid, fresh, always moving toward the ocean. And one should be like water, soft, feminine, receptive, loving, nonviolent, etc. These kind of characteristics. And one should not be like a rock. A rock appears to be very strong, and the water appears to be very weak. But we cannot take those appearances at face value, because the appearance is simply given to us by the knowledge that we have, and the knowledge is based on the context. So we see in a fight, as a human being, maybe a rock is powerful, and maybe water is not so powerful. But in reality, the rock actually disappears against this very soft water, this very masculine, hard, strong rock. This male mind, this very aggressive mind. Rather than considering how to get EV from the table, our mind becomes very obsessed with some regular who's played back recently. We're not thinking about how are we going to maximize our EV against this fish. We're not looking at hands every single showdown that this recreational player has played. He's losing 35 BB, 100. The reg is winning 3. Our focus should be on the rec. But we are trained to look out for threats against their survival, which is no different than we were when we were in the savannah 2 million years ago. It's no different. The problem is that the brain does not understand which problems to focus on, because the threat sensor comes on. This guy is 3-betting me, and I'm hyper focused on that. But there's so many scenarios, infinite scenarios, where it's better where we are just going to be exploited by regulars constantly, because the way that we exploit fish, or the way that we make EV, simply involves being exploitable. And often we are going to directly be exploited by a very small amount of their hands, maybe 1-2% that they're going to adjust, and maybe they'll make a minuscule amount of EV against us a bit more. But then we're taking that much more from the recreational player. But it's very hard for people to understand that, like, where's the money coming from? Where's the EV actually coming from? We must understand where our EV comes from. If we get 3-bet too often, we don't need to feel like we need to do something about it. We actually need to investigate our own reaction. Not simply look at an RNG and say, well, this is the optimal 4-bet frequency. In fact, maybe they're never 3-bet bluffing in this situation. They're always doing it because of their perception, but there's always more that we can think about. And this whole thing is about understanding our opponent's psychology. What would be very foolish was just 4-bet this guy because we're fucking mad that he 3-bet. That would be absolutely nonsensical, silly. At least you have to think very consciously. But what happens is that the emotional system gets hijacked, and these higher level brain functions momentarily get sort of stolen. We don't even have the capacity to think about poker in these terms. And the reason why we get hijacked is because we get told that certain things, like being bullied, getting 3-bet, being told that we're not good, being told that this is how we're being exploited, whatever the case is, we're told that these things actually matter. We're told that respect matters, insults matters. And this has absolutely nothing to do with our decisions. We see a very smart, tight recreational player that generally doesn't give up too much, but he thinks someone is pushing him around. And he does some very erratic shit. And it plays right into the hands of his opponent, who already knows that he's not going to run a bluff into this guy because he's bet last time and he folded the river, and he knows that this time the rec is going to be interested in calling. And now this whale just calls down second pair for like 150 big blinds, and we've only just triple barreled top pair, top kicker or something. And we also know that this guy generally raises all his good hands on the flop or the turn. So our top pair, top kicker is very good. These are so many situations that we can miss by just assuming this is GTO, this is GTO. This wanting to take a stand that the recreational player wants to do has absolutely nothing to do with strategy. But the recreational player has a very hard time differentiating between what's important to think about and what's not relevant. But the idea is, we've been 3-bet, we bluffed last time. We don't want him to get away with it next time. This is not strategy. In fact, they might not even be thinking about strategy. They might be thinking in terms of winning a hand. Water is very, very feminine. Water is very soft. Water is very loving, non-aggressive. But the non-aggressive wins, and I don't mean in terms of your betting patterns. I mean in terms of your perception of the way that people think. It's about the way that we perceive reality. It's about the way that we are taught to look for potential threat, even when there is none. Or if there is none, we need to be able to evaluate it correctly. But this hijacking that we have, mostly due to being monkeys for millions of years and being hunted by bigger predators, our survival mechanism is to have these massive fight or flight responses when we face threat. The problem is that we are not able to necessarily differentiate. Certainly a recreational player that doesn't have the knowledge past his ordinary world thing where someone bullies him, he wants to say, fuck you, take a stand, I'm going to scream. He doesn't understand that this is not strategy. This is not the way to play poker, but he's hijacked by his emotions because he's a slave of his emotions. In fact, I would say that more than 90-something% of people are a slave of their emotions, and all of these 90% of people will say, no, it's not me, it's someone else. And we all know people like that. But strategy and decisions have absolutely nothing to do with owning anybody. They have to do with understanding people's psychology and what's actually running the mechanism of that person. And most often what's running other people is their interest in proving something to the player that they're playing against. I made a big fold. I'm going to show you, even though I'm telling you that my strategy is that I don't think you're bluffing enough, I'm going to show you this fold. But because I feel as though I want to imagine you feeling insecure about the fact that I think you were under bluffing, I'm going to show you my strategy. I'm going to just torch. And I'm not even going to consider, well, what happens next time when you know that I did this? I am just so arrogant that I think you will never adjust, and I will show you that. This is not poker. This is not rationality. This is absolute nonsense. Why would you want to give your opponent information about what you're doing? Why would you want to show your cards? Are we insecure about what they're thinking about? Or do we think they're smarter than us? Are we afraid that they're thinking that they're smarter than us for making a fold or whatever the case is, and we want to show them? Or for making a bluff? Or for making a value bet, we want to show, see, we are better than you. We want to show you that we are better than you, even though better has nothing to do with any thoughts at all. It has to do with the decisions that we make. Very important. This is how the education system trains children is to teach them to compare themselves to other people, other people's outputs in the short term, and to make them feel bad if they don't do a good job based on arbitrary results. Can you remember Christopher Columbus's birthday? Shut the fuck up. Who gives a fuck? Let's actually think about something interesting like poker, right? That people are bullied to the point that they're made to feel inhumane if they make mistakes. So it's very hard to even open up to the possibility that there are no mistakes even possible in poker, because you cannot even know what's right. In order to say that something is a mistake, you have to be able to say that something is of higher value, and there's no way to prove anything. And I've said this many times, and it's very important to understand this fact. It's not a philosophical fact. It's a fact about the nature of reality. What you could argue is philosophy, I would argue is just reality. And philosophy is simply, well, there are many, many different branches of philosophy. But anyways, this is about the nature of reality. This is not a personal opinion. Now, this is how you produce a factory worker. This is how you produce someone that works at McDonald's and clicks a register or puts a hamburger on. You tell them you're very bad and you need to do a better job so we can make more money. They put ideas, money, ahead of real human lives. But the mind has a very hard time differentiating between human bodies, emotions, real people, and then ideas. Unfortunately, we live in this society. Now, one of the greatest strategies of the society is basically to get people to believe in ideas above their own well-being and get them to agree upon these ideas or myths collectively. And basically to have a large-scale human cooperation, whether it's modern or medieval in the church or in whatever other religions that we had, or an ancient city, some kind of tribe a long time ago with the Aboriginals or the Native Americans. It's always rooted in some sort of myths that only exist in the imagination, that are not real, they're just imagined. Obviously these myths are not real. So churches are rooted in like myths of like gods that are separate from you, which is not true. You are not separate from God. You are one with God. It's just a function of whether you've realized that, whether you found consciousness or not. But anyways, two Catholics, they've never met, can go anywhere on a crusade and kill millions of people, and it's perfectly fine. Or they can go put money into the basket and give it to charity for people that have cancer, because they both have this common idea together. But most states, most nations are basically rooted in some sort of nationalistic idea. America is a very good country. We go and kill all the Indians. We go rape the entire world. We steal everybody's money, but anybody, it's like these kind of nonsensical myths about our homeland, about our justice system, are absolutely nonsense. For instance, two lawyers can get together. They have never met. They have nothing to do with each other than their profession. And nevertheless, they can combine their efforts to defend a complete stranger as well, because they both believe in the existence of laws, justice, human rights, money, And none of these things actually exist. All these things are ideas in the human mind. The problem is that the ordinary consciousness is actually believing in these ideas. And when it comes to poker and starting from first principle, in order to break anything down, you obviously have to differentiate idea from existential thing. All of these are simply stories that people invent to tell themselves there are no gods in the universe. There are no nations in reality. There's no money in reality. There's no human rights. There's no laws. There's no justice outside of one's imagination. And obviously these imagined things are all a function of whatever the individual is conditioned with. So if you're in a society 3,000 years ago where women are slaves, people of a certain ethnicity are slaves or nationality, etc., well, if you don't believe in this, you're fucking bad, you're evil. Right now we think we're so good. Absolute nonsense. There's no difference. We are simply delusional Homo sapiens. And our brains need to actually be able to expand and realize this fact. To realize that we are believing in a whole bunch of nonsensical things that are not real. But people can easily understand that primitive people cement their social order, say, by believing in ghosts or spirits and gravity, like saying, oh, I'm going to meet at the full moon, and it's going to make some difference because my body is 70% water. And what controls the water? The moon. So I'm going to believe that this has some influence. These people are dreaming. In fact, even modern business people, lawyers, are really the most powerful sorcerers. Because the difference between them and like tribal shamans is that modern lawyers they basically tell way more insane shit based on cause and effect, which doesn't work because cause and effect assumes that you put a billiard ball on the table and you say, well, how does this white ball smash into all the other ones and get it into a pocket? Well, of course, you hit your cue. Cause, effect. But no, how did this table even come into existence? How did these balls come into existence? How did you, who's hitting the cue? See, cause and effect cannot understand what it's actually inside of, the frame it's in. And that's what happens in mind expansion, we have to be able to go outside of the current box that we are in, but our eyes cannot see that we are in the box. So if somehow the American government says that this company has been giving secrets to whatever country, I don't really know how it would work. Right? Maybe there's some war, I think, in Russia, but I don't watch the news. And I think I heard someone tell me that like Starbucks, there are other companies that have gotten banned. Okay? So we think that this great business that actually exists is now no longer there. But really, what's happening is it's factory workers, the people that are creating the plastic cups, the people that are actually in there, that are filling the coffee, etc. The shareholders that want to continue to make money. It's not like these things just vanish. But what happens is that there's no actual connection to the ideas about the company and physical reality. There may be bodies enacting agreements in the sky, but these are simply the collective imagination. And when it comes to poker, we cannot believe in the collective imagination. We have to be able to differentiate thought from reality. There is a lot that can be said about the ways that laws in one country people behave in and they believe in, and they say, yes, these are real laws, but all that exists are trees, cars, airplanes, squirrels, the grass. These laws don't exist, but they're in agreement. But you see, we know the laws that we're potentially going to violate, and we know not to do them. We know that when we go to another country, if we've thought about this, they may have different laws, and we want to be careful. So these collective agreements that we take on, very important to be conscious of the fact that they are simply agreements in the sky. Yet our nervous system understands this, and we don't need to consciously think about this because we are so intelligent. A long time ago, when someone wanted to set up a business, very often what they would do is say they would have a skill, they'd prove I'm capable of doing this skill. They would go to a lender, they would borrow money, they would try to do this business, and if they did not succeed, They would either go to debtor's prison or they would have to work off their debt. A number of people were sold into slavery. A lot of Caucasian people from England were sold as slaves into America. And not necessarily only sold as slaves, many of them were not, but they were transported to America to help because they were debtors. Something that we do to now, which we collectively imagine is the existence of limited liability companies, which now you cannot sue the person who messed up and who got the loan. It's the company's fault, which is fine, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's understanding that these companies were legally independent of the people who actually set them up, invested the money in them, managed them. And over many centuries now, such companies actually have been in the main arena for the economy. In fact, even medicine is something that is now privatized in many countries. And these limited liability companies, these corporations, are simply a collection of ideas. There's no one even responsible at the end. So we need to be able to differentiate the rules of the game from existential reality. We need to be able to differentiate the rules that we've been given, our perception or schema of poker, our past knowledge, with our opponent in front of us and the meaning of the opponent, what they think, how we can attempt to make money against them, not simply refer to past ideas and memories as to how we played before. We need to be very much in the moment. If we are still in a time-bound consciousness, it's going to be very challenging. So I'm going to end soon, and I would like to end with a Bruce Lee quote about water. He said, "Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive. Do not adjust to the object. And you will be able to find your way around it or through it. If nothing in you is rigid, outward things will disclose themselves." And this is absolutely the case. He also said, "Empty your mind, be formless, be shapeless like water." If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. If you put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you put it into a teapot, it is the teapot. Water can flow, it can crash. Be water, my friend. This is what Bruce Lee said. And Bruce Lee was not only an incredible martial artist, but he was also a very wise, very good philosopher. Very small man, but stronger than anybody. That's because he sharpened his axe before he chopped his wood. He was very intelligent. He sharpened his knife. And in poker, our knife is our consciousness. So I love you all so much, and I will speak with you all very soon. Thank you so much for joining me today.